So I've spent thousands of hours learning languages, and I don't think the hardest thing that I've ever done is learning Chinese grammar, or learning Russian grammar, or learning tones of Chinese, or anything to do with languages, really. I think the hardest part about learning languages is the motivation. So I started learning Chinese about 2018, so about 6 years ago. But I do not have 6 years of learning in Chinese. I've got much less than that. I've probably spent, 1,000 hours, maybe 2,000, I don't know, hours learning Chinese. But it's been on and off for the past 6 years. Like, there have been periods where I've been really intensely learning it, very obsessed with it, constantly when I'm walking everywhere listening to Chinese audio, being in the gym listening to Chinese audio, shower listening to Chinese audio, spending many hours on it every single day. But there have also been periods of many months, even at some points up to an entire year, where I didn't even touch the language at all. And this is simply because in learning that language, my motivation would go up and down, up and down. So I think this is one of the biggest difficulties when it comes to learning languages, getting the motivation. But here's the thing. I am pretty grateful that I actually took it this far in Chinese, because the majority of people, they will be super hyped when they start learning a language. They'll be super excited, they'll hit the ground running, they'll make some progress in the language, then they'll slow down and they'll give up. Many people that I talk to, they give up learning languages pretty fast. So I actually have managed to maintain motivation reasonably hard in the long run, but in terms of keeping motivation long term, it's been very difficult for me. One of the main reasons is because when you're learning a language, kind of like when you're going to the gym, what I've realized is that you have newbie gains. So when you go to the gym, you first start lifting weights. Literally, if you just even step in the gym or you do like a bicep curl, you're going to gain muscle if you're a beginner in the gym. Newbie gains. Same thing with language learning, I've realized. Because when you first start learning a language, you're learning all the really common words, all the really simple grammar structures. So you're going to see this stuff over and over and over again. So when you first start learning a language, progress happens really fast. You feel like you're making really, really fast progress. But especially when you kind of reach that intermediate level in a language, it's called like the intermediate plateau. Because when you kind of reach that level in a language, your progress starts to slow down and, the progress starts to come to a halt. Especially in a language like Chinese, where it's really hard and it takes a long time to acquire vocabulary, it felt like my progress, it still feels like my progress is so slow. So that's one of the challenges I've faced, is keeping motivation in the long run, especially when progress gets really, really slow in those intermediate levels, or even keeping motivation beyond the beginning stages. It's one of the hardest things. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video, how I've managed to maintain motivation in the long run, my approach on motivation and language learning. So I think one of the biggest things when it comes to motivation in language learning is not something that deep down we really want to do. Let me explain this in detail. So when it comes to, say, motivation for going to the gym or motivation for exercise, every human being on earth has a deep desire to be healthy, to gain muscle, to be strong, to be fit, right? So motivation can be found within you. Same thing with, say, for example, improving your relationships. Every human being on earth wants, unless you're like a serial killer or a narcissist, or like a crazy person or something, every human being on earth wants to improve their relationships. They want to have better relationships. So deep down, they have a deep desire for that. Same thing with making money. Every human being on earth wants to have some satisfying, fulfilling work. They have a deep down desire for that. They have a deep down desire to make money. But language learning, unless, for example, you live in a country and you struggle to communicate with people, the desire for language learning does not really exist deep within us. So you kind of have to find a reason, a desire, a reason for learning languages. So the first point I want to make here that I've realized is, over your language learning journey, you need to have a deep why, like a deep reason why you're learning that specific language that you're learning. So for me, for Chinese, I've always wanted to be able to speak fluently Chinese with people. So what I do is I always remind myself of that long-term goal, that goal of being fluent, that goal of actually being able to hold a conversation with a Chinese person. To me, it blows my mind. Being able to tackle such a difficult language being able to master such a difficult language and being able to communicate with people freely. And like when I look at Chinese writing, it's so crazy being able to understand like these thousands of characters. So for me, I always visualize that end goal. I always imagine myself, having conversations with people, being fluent, having that kind of really high level understanding and control over the language. So you need a deep reason why you're learning this language. If you're just doing it because you think it's going to make you money in the long run, if you're just doing it because you have to do it as a subject in school, then you're not going to maintain that motivation in the long run. So you always have to remind yourself why you're learning this language and visualize that end goal of you achieving where you want to achieve in that language. The point I want to make here is you have to actually make your method of learning languages enjoyable. Because here's what I learned about language learning. What I learned from Stephen Krashen, the linguist, one of the leading linguists when it comes to language learning, languages are learned through input, through getting a lot of audio, a lot of reading, getting a lot of input of that language in your head. So, especially if you're in the upper beginner or intermediate stages, that input can literally come from anywhere. It can come from TV shows, it can come from books, it can come from movies, it can come from podcasts, from articles, from anything. As a beginner, you kind of have to use beginning material, so it's a bit more difficult. But as you're reaching those higher stages and you get more freedom in what you can use as input, then it's important that you use a method, you use input that's enjoyable to you. It's not going to be as fun as like watching a movie in your native language or something. But, for example, recently I've been watching this TV series called 30而已. It's basically this TV series about some girls who are like reaching 30 years old. And in China, when you're like 30 years old and above, you're considered like a leftover woman, I think it's called. You're kind of like, if you're single and above 30, you're considered like a leftover woman. So there's this whole concept of like being over 30 and it being this big thing in China and around the world as well, but especially in China. And so this TV series like shows the perspective of different girls reaching their 30s. Anyway, I've been watching this show. It's been pretty interesting. And, I've been doing other things in Chinese, watching podcasts and stuff. But when I watch this show, I'm not like looking at it from the perspective of, okay, let's study this language. I'm looking at it from the perspective of, okay, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen to this character next? And I'm actually interested in the story. I'm actually enjoying the story. So that's the thing. When you learn about language learning theory and you realize you can have any input in the world, why not pick stuff that you genuinely enjoy? So find input. That's the next thing I realized. Find input that you actually enjoy. So yeah, I've been watching that TV show. I really enjoy it. I like listening to, right now my main language that I'm studying is Chinese. That's my next big language that I'm tackling. I like to listen to, in the gym, I'm listening to music in the language. I'm watching that TV show in the language. When I'm going for walks, I'm plugging in, I'm listening to podcasts that I find enjoyable. It's not going to be as fun as like watching a movie in your native language, but if you're making it so you want to find out what happens next, you're excited by the story, you're actually interested in the content, then you're going to get much more motivation. And the second part to that is also make sure your method is enjoyable. If you don't like writing down every single word, every single sentence you find, then don't do that. Like for me, I've always experimented with a method of language learning called sentence mining. It's basically where every time you come up with a sentence that you want to remember, you put it into this flashcard program called Anki. There have been times in the past where I've used Anki religiously, and there have been times in the past where I haven't really used it at all. And right now I am using Anki. I think it is a good method to learn languages. But you want to make sure your method is not overwhelming, is not super difficult. So for me, with Anki, what made it overwhelming was in the past, I used to add like 20, 30 cards a day to my Anki deck. So I'd be learning like 20, 30 new words a day, which seemed great, seemed amazing, but it became overwhelming. I was literally making it my goal to put as many words as possible. I was learning words that I would never use. I was learning useless words. And if you're trying to learn words that you're not going to use, that are not super interesting to you, it's going to be more boring. So right now I make it my goal around 5 new words a day max. No more than 5 words a day. I'm not adding new words every single day, but the days I do add words, I'm adding about 5 a day. And I'm finding that to be a good number, because if I add too many cards a day, then I have so many reviews to do. If I miss like a few days of doing Anki, the reviews add up. And I have to do so much review Like I remember there were periods where I'd go like a couple weeks without doing Anki, and when I would come back, I would have to spend like 10 hours reviewing every single card that I'd missed. So make sure your method is enjoyable. And one small thing I said there was like, make sure the words you're trying to remember, make sure the words you're capturing from your input are actually interesting. You want to learn the words that are, actually interesting to you, that actually you would use in your daily life. So let's say you watch a TV show and you encounter like 100 words you don't know in that episode. You don't want to capture and try to remember every single one. When I watch a TV show, every episode max, I'll take like 5 words maximum from the TV show. Out of like, 50 words I don't know, I'll take like 5 max. So don't capture every single word you don't know. Only capture those words that actually interest you. Like, oh, damn, I've always wanted to know this word. Or like, oh, damn, I've seen this word a lot. This is one word that I could definitely use. Get those words. Basically, there's the concept of N+1 words that I learned from, I think, Stephen Krashen as well. Basically, there's like a circle, a bubble, which is like all the words you know in that language. And outside that bubble, there's every word you don't know in the language. But just outside that bubble is going to be these N+ words. These are the words that are like really, really close to you being able to understand. So these are words that maybe you've seen a bunch of times, but you don't quite know what it means. Or it's words that you use very, very frequently and you've never known how to say it. So these are words that are just outside your like circle of comprehension. These are the words you want to be mining for when you do your input, when you consume material. So I made it to keep your motivation in the language. You don't want to look up every single word. You don't want to capture every single word. You just want to capture those words that really interest you, that really, excite you, if that makes sense. So that's the third point when it comes to like having motivation. Yeah, related to that, when I said like do input that you enjoy, what is your reason for learning that language? If your reason for learning that language is to talk to native speakers, there's a lot of like talk out there on the internet where it's like, okay, don't talk to people, don't output until you're really, really good, and then start talking to people. But if you're learning that language because you actually want to talk to people, because you want to interact with people, then why not start interacting with people? Like for me, if possible, I will use the language with native speakers. I will try to, converse with them a bit in that language. Because the reason I'm learning Chinese, for example, is because I want to talk to people in Chinese. So I'm not going to wait till I'm fluent. I'm going to start using it now. Even if I'm not going to get a ton of learning from it, I'm just going to use it because it's going to keep me motivated in the long run. And if you're learning the language for the culture, for the, understanding the culture, then don't wait till you're fluent to start watching movies and TV shows. Do it now. Use it to learn. Start consuming the culture. Start getting engrossed into it. So yeah, for me, Chinese has been like on and off when it comes to motivation. And I would say right now, I'm back into learning it at full capacity. Previously, I was like, kind of like, for the past maybe like couple months, I was kind of like maintaining it, if that makes sense. I was doing just enough Chinese to kind of maintain my level, but now I've like pushed it up and I'm actually going to make some progress. So I'm keeping these points in mind when I'm learning it. Like if you'll probably reach a point in your language learning where you'll feel a slump of motivation. You'll be like, damn, this material I'm learning is so boring. This method I'm doing is so boring. I'm making no progress in this language. I'm seeing no progress. You need to stop, and you might have to change your approach. Like I would reach points where I'd be so overwhelmed by all the flashcards coming in from Anki. I'd be so bored of whatever input I was consuming, and it made me want to give up. What you need to do is you need to realize that there is input, there is content out there that will excite you. You need to just look for that. You need to move the planets. You need to travel the world. Not travel the world, I mean like metaphorically. You need to look out there for input, for content that makes you excited, that makes you interested. So go search for that and it will re-spark your motivation. Or maybe completely change your method, your approach. If you're doing Duolingo and you hate it, get the fuck off Duolingo. If you're doing Anki and you hate it, either reduce how many cards you're learning every single day or do a completely new approach. I would recommend the first one, reduce the amount of cards you do every single day. So if your method is boring, you're hating it, or the input and content you're doing is boring and you're hating it, change it up. Because you do have to accept that language learning is a slow process. And there are going to be periods where you feel like you're making zero progress. Like I would go weeks and I would feel like I'd made zero progress in that language. You need to trust in the process and you need to enjoy the process. So trust that you are making progress and enjoy the process. Find material, find methods that you enjoy. On top of motivation's great, but on a day-to-day basis, you may not have motivation for learning languages. So the other fundamental thing is habits. You need to make sure your habits will save you when motivation isn't there. So you need to be learning languages ideally at the same time every day, same place every single day. Get into a habit. For me, when I was in high school, I got into the habit for when I was on the bus on the way to school. That was my language learning period. That's when I would do that intense language learning. So if you can make it a habit to learn languages, you will turn up no matter how you feel. But the other points I mentioned in this video are extremely important because this last point here is just for like day-to-day motivation. But in terms of motivation in the long run, you need ways to cultivate it. You do need that deep reason why you're learning that language. You do need to make it interesting and exciting and do things that you enjoy. So hope this video helped.